In this section, we'll look at foreign policy during the presidency of Ronald Reagan in his first term, who took office in 1980. Reagan was deeply suspicious of the Soviet Union and détente. He believed that the SALT I and SALT II agreements strengthened the Soviet position relative to the Americans. While Carter had withdrawn the SALT II treaty from the Senate following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Reagan did agree to abide by both the SALT agreements, but he was looking to strengthen the American position in any other way he could. Reagan reflected really a different attitude towards the Soviets, and he publicly denounced them as an evil empire in a March 1983 speech. Reagan believed that if the U.S. were to negotiate with the Soviets, it needed to be in a stronger position. Accordingly, Reagan dramatically increased defense spending during his presidency. As Reagan took office, negotiations on intermediate-range nuclear missiles, or so-called INF, intermediate nuclear forces, that negotiations had stalled, and the Soviets had begun building up their highly accurate SS-20s in response. Reagan then encouraged modernization and expansion of the INFs in the European NATO countries as a reaction. With the Reagan buildup and the expansion of the interrange nuclear missiles in Europe, protests broke out all over the continent. When a group of workers united as the Solidarity Union protested in Gdansk, Poland in 1981, the Soviet-backed authorities cracked down. Reagan instituted harsh economic sanctions on Poland as a result. The Solidarity movement, with its charismatic leader Lech Walesa, however, continued to grow as Reagan provided covert assistance to them. Relations with the Soviets continued to deteriorate when Brezhnev died in 1982 and a new leader, Yuri Andropov, emerged. Andropov soon died in 1984 and another leader followed, Konstantin Chernenko. Both Andropov and Chernenko were older and generally hardline in the Cold War. Arms control talks resumed in Geneva, but everybody agreed that it was more show than substance by both sides. On September 1st, 1983, the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner, Flight 007, and 269 people lost their lives. While questions existed whether the shooting was deliberate or a mistake, Reagan announced new sanctions against the Soviet Union, including the restrictions on travel by Soviet citizens. After Reagan agreed to disavow a long-term arms sale agreement with the People's Republic of China on Taiwan, American relations with the People's Republic of China, Communist China, improved. New agreements expanded trade and technological exchanges, and eventually in 1984, reciprocal state visits occurred. Here you see the Chinese leader and Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, outside the White House. Reagan found a quagmire in the Middle East, kind of like Carter. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, had settled in Lebanon, having been expelled from Egypt and Jordan. And when a civil war broke out there in the late 1970s, neighboring Syria intervened. Israel saw the PLO and the Syrian presence as a threat to its own security and responded with a massive invasion of Lebanon in June 1982. After a peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel began an Israeli withdrawal, the Reagan administration proposed a broader peace agreement that promised more moderate Palestinians allied with Jordan autonomy in the West Bank in exchange for Arab recognition of Israel. Much to Reagan's dismay, however, the proposal went nowhere. It was condemned by all sides, and at the same time, the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon had left a vacuum of power there. Reagan was committed to the pro-Western but weak government of Lebanon, and with the power vacuum, there's a lot of violence. Anyway, Reagan dispatched in the summer of 1983 a group of Marines to join a multinational force and guard the Beirut airport amid all the violence. The presence of Western troops angered many Muslims, however, and on October 23, 1983, Islamic radicals drove a truck bomb into the American Marines compound, killing over 250 Marines. Reagan vowed to stay in the Middle East, saying American credibility was at stake, and for several months the Americans exchanged long-distance fire with Syrians trying to topple the Lebanese government. Finally, however, Reagan decided that the American position was untenable, and he withdrew the Marines in February 1984. Reagan remained active in Latin America as well, committed to fighting the spread of communism. A presidential commission led by the former presidential advisor Henry Kissinger, named, I guess accordingly, the Kissinger Commission, cited the need to strengthen protections in Central America and double economic aid to the area. The Democrats in Congress, meanwhile, insisted that any aid be tied to strengthening of democratic political systems there. In the Central American country of El Salvador, Reagan supported the anti-communists despite their human rights abuses. With American aid and pressure, however, elections were held, and the relatively moderate Jose Napoleon Duarte, shown up here on the right, won in 1984. The U.S. continued to pressure Duarte against the abuses as he fought leftist rebels. In neighboring Nicaragua, Reagan believed that the new leftist Sandinista government that Carter had hoped to moderate with aid was actually a veil for Soviet expansion. Reagan began aiding anti-Sandinista rebels led by members of the former right-wing dictator Anastasio Somoza's regime. These rebels became known as the Contras and operated from neighboring Honduras and Costa Rica. In 1984, after it was learned that the CIA had helped mine Nicaraguan harbors, Congress began to debate cutting off aid to the Contras. Congress ended up passing the Boland Amendment, named for a senator from Massachusetts, and that forbade any money spent on the Contras or for overthrowing the Nicaraguan government. Despite apparently free elections in Nicaragua in 1984, Reagan continued to see the Sandinistas as communists and the Contras as what he called freedom fighters. Reagan had other concerns in the area as well. In 1979, a leftist government had seized control of the tiny island of Grenada off of Venezuela, off of South America. And that island had an airfield that Reagan believed might be used to hamper shipping from the Panama Canal. And so what Reagan did was he publicly expressed concern for Americans at a medical school in the island as sort of an excuse to get involved. Despite no evidence of a threat, Reagan ordered an invasion of Grenada in October 1983. The attack killed several hundred, including more than 36 U.S. soldiers, and led to a new government that was friendly to the United States, but it also led to international condemnation because people said it wasn't necessary. In closing, I should add that Reagan believed South Africa was such an ally in the Cold War that he refused public efforts to boycott the nation or to divest American money in it. And a lot of people were demanding that because of the South Africa's racist apartheid policies, and even the famous pastor Desmond Tutu in South Africa criticized the United States. In any event, this concludes the section on foreign policy during Reagan's first term.